Hey guys, what's up? So in this video, we're going to be looking at how we can test our Django application. For the previous videos, we've been building some functionality that can allow us to use our application to this point. Now we need a way in which we can be assured that our application will continue running the same way, even when we are given different inputs or different data. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and write tests that are going to be automating the process of testing our application. So normally we can use our application with end users, but in this case we're going to write code that's going to define how our database or how our different functionality is going to work given different users. So let's get started. Now the first thing we're going to observe is the tests module within each of our apps. So each of the apps we created here, for example the users app, has a test module, as well as our post app right here. It also has a tests module. So we're going to be writing most of our tests in these different modules. So let's begin by creating a test. So the way we write Django's test is by using the inbuilt test framework. So Django allows us to write tests, but it does it in a way similar to the unit test. Actually, it's built on top of unit test, the inbuilt Python library module that allows us to test application. So this works in a way that you create a class, which is a test case, and within that class you describe different functions or methods that allow you to test different functionality. So let's go ahead and create test cases for both our posts as well as our users. So I'm going to begin by creating a test case for our posts. So in this case, I'm in my post test.py module, and then I'll begin by creating a post test case. And this test case is simply a class that subclasses our test case class. And right after doing this, I'm going to pass it for now. And after doing this, I'm going to also do the same thing for our users test. So I'll just simply bring this here. And what I have to do is to write a class, and then I'll call this the user test case. And this is actually going to inherit from our test case class. And now simply pass this for now. Now after doing this, the way we basically run our tests in Django is by using our Python manage.py management script. So I'm going to pull up our terminal, and when I run Python 3, actually I'm on Linux, so when I run manage.py and then test, in this case we see that we don't have any tests. So the way we write tests within our test cases is by writing methods into these test case classes that allow us to test different functionality on our specific apps. So when I go to our test.py within our posts, I can come right here and define a test. So the way we write a test is by defining a method and then calling that method test and then underscore, then define whatever functionality we may want to define at that point. So for example, in this case, we're going to define the functionality of our homepage. So I can just come right here and say test homepage and then call this self, and then pass this for now. Now I can create another test case. So for example, I can come right here and then say test, and what I have to do is to test our post creation. So I'm just simply going to come right in here and I'll test our post creation, and then it's going to take in self, and then I'll pass this for now. Now let's say I wanted to test some functionality within our users, so I can come within our users.py file right here, and then I'll define a function. So I'll call this test, and I'll say this is going to be testing our user creation. So I'm simply going to call this user creation, and it's going to take in self, and then I'll pass this for now. So what we've done at this point is to create tests within our post test case as well as within our users test case. So now if we pull up our terminal right here and we run our manage.py test again, in this case, it's going to tell us that it has found 3 tests. We can also observe that we are creating a test database for alias default, and this is important. Django provides us a way in which we can create a separate database for testing that we can actually use instead of our default database that we use for storing our data during development. So I'm going to go ahead and test our first functionality. So the first functionality we're going to test in this case is going to be one for our URLs. So we're going to be testing some of our pages or a page on our posts URLs. So I'm going to go within our posts app right here, and then I'll go to our URLs. Now we're going to test our homepage. So the way we're going to test our homepage is by creating a client. So this client is provided for us by our test case, and this client provides a way in which we can imitate a real user using a real web browser to carry out requests. So I'm going to come within our tests here, and I'm going to come within our test homepage function or our test homepage test, and then I'm going to create a client. So this client is going to be self dot. So in this case, I'm going to access the client object, and then I'm going to call an HTTP method on this client object. So in this case, we're going to call a get. So we're going to make a request to get the home page. And right after doing this, then I'm going to simply go ahead and assert if the status code returned to us is one for a successful HTTP request. Now I'll do that with self, and I'll just come right here and say self.assert. And in this case, we can say assert equal. Then what we're going to assert in this case, we're going to first get our response. So then we're going to do that. Actually here, we're going to actually call this response. Sorry for that. So I'll simply call this our response object. That's a result of us making a get request to our URL for our homepage. And then we shall assert if our response status code is actually 200, meaning successful status code. So now I say 200, and I'm going to go ahead and save. So when we run this, when we run our tests now, we now see that our homepage is actually working. So our tests have run and they are successful. We can also be able to look at how we can test our templates. So we can be able to test if the template returned as a result of this request is actually our template. So when you go to our views.py right here, the template we're returning for that specific page is our index.html. So we can come right in here, and let me close this for now. So you can also test if the template returned is actually our template for index.html. So I can just come right in here and say self.assert. So basically, the test case class provides us these assert statements. So I can just come and say assert template used. So when I assert template used, I provide the response object. So this is actually going to be the response object which we've created with our client, and then I'm going to specify which template I want to test in this case. So I'll do that by providing a template as index.html, and when I go ahead and save, I can simply run our test again. So I'm going to pull this up. So in this case, we see that our tests are running, meaning that our home page is actually returning our template of index.html. Now another thing we can do is to test some of the content that's returned with our response. So when I go ahead and run our server with Python 3 manual.py run server, this is going to run our server. So when you go to our Chrome right here, I'm going to go to our localhost 8000. Now we're going to test if our response actually contains any of the things we have here. So I'm going to test if we have the word list of posts within the response. So I'll copy this, and then I'll come back here, and what I'll do is to check if our response basically contains that specific word. So the way I'm going to do that is by coming and saying self.assert, and then in this case I'm going to call the assert contains function, and what this does is to take in the response and then check if that response has a specific word. So in this case, we're going to have our list of posts. So I'm simply going to come right here and put in our list of posts. Now when I save, I'm going to come and stop our server right here. So when I run our test again, it's actually going to be our test. So if I run Python 3 manual.py and then test, right now it's going to run our tests, and we see that our tests are actually passing. Now we can be able to also go ahead and test other functionality. So let's go ahead and test our post creation. So the post creation is going to be dependent on our post model that we created here. Now we're going to be able to create a dummy post, and the beauty is we have a different test database that we create each time we run this post. Now I'm going to begin by importing our post model. So I'll come at the top of our code right here and then say from .models. I am simply going to go ahead and import our post model. And right after importing our post model, now what I have to do is to go ahead and create a dummy post that's going to be in our database. So this dummy post is going to be created each time we are running or are first running our tests Now the way I'm going to do that is by coming right here and then saying def, and in this case it will be our setup function. So if you've used unit test, the setup function is one that runs each time we are beginning our test. And this is important for things such as creating any data that you may want in the database before testing. So what I'm going to do is to come and say self, and within here I'm going to basically create a post object that shall find in our database and use for testing. So I'm just going to call that self.post, and in this case what I'm going to do is to use our post model to create this object. So I'll just say self post and then I'll say object, and then in this case I'll call a create function, and then I'll specify some of the attributes we want this post to have. So each post has a title, a content, and an author, and I'm going to go ahead and specify those. So I'll give in our title, and our title is going to be our test title. Now also give in an author, so I'm just going to come right here and say that we shall have a test author, and then we're also going to have so in this case we have an author, a title, and then we shall have some content. So I'll just come right here and provide some test content. Now right after creating this post, we can go ahead and basically test if some of the attributes actually match the given post. So I'm going to remove our pass statement right here, and what I have to do is to basically query for this in the database. So I want to actually check if it exists first, and then we check if its title matches the title of the post we created in our setup function. So I'm just simply going to come right here, and what I have to do is to search for the post or query for it. So I'll just say post to test, and this is actually going to be post dot objects dot get, and in this case we shall get if the ID is equal to 1, meaning the first object that will be in our database at that point. And once we have that, then I'm going to go ahead, and what I'll do is to basically check for some of the attributes of this. So what I'm going to do in this case is to check for the title. So I can just say post title, and the post title for this post will be the post title. So I'll just come and say post dot title, and once I do that, actually it's going to be post to test dot title. And once I have that, I'm going to go ahead and use this to test if this title is the same as the title for the post we created on starting our test. So I'll do that with self.assert. In this case, we shall say equal to, and in this case, it's going to be our self.post.title. And in this case, we shall provide our post title. So once I've done this, I'm going to go ahead and save, and then pull up our terminal right here and run our test with Python 3 running.py and then test. So right now we see that all our tests are running, and now we are okay. So each of these dots represent a past test. So when you go and change this, so let's say we change this to post title, or let's say we change this to, let's say if we change this to our wrong whatever. So in this case, you can just say wrong title. I can go ahead and save. Now when I pull up our terminal right here, I can run this, and right now we see that we have an error. So test title is not equal to wrong title. So I'm going to put this back, meaning that our post creation is working. We can also assert if our attributes are actually the same. So I'm going to come here and self.assert, and in this case we're going to assert equal. So I'm going to assert equal, and then I say self. In this case we shall say self.post.title, and in this case we shall check if it's equal to our test title. Now go ahead and save this, and I'll do the same thing for our author. So I'll say .assert, and then I'll say equal. Then in this case we shall pass in our self dot, in this case we shall pass in our post, and then dot author, and let's say in this case we shall actually check if our test author is our test author. Now when I save this, I'm going to simply come right here and I'll run our test again. Now we see that our tests are all running, we are safe. Now let's go ahead and also check for our users app. Now, in our users app, we basically have one test that's going to allow us to basically test the functionality of creating a user. So we're going to start by creating a dummy user. So I'm just going to simply come right here and create a test function, or actually it's going to be a setup function, and this will take in self. And right after having this, then you can go ahead and basically go and create a simple user. So I'm going to use the get user model function that allows us to get our current user model. So I import that from Django.contrib, and in this case we shall import it from our auth app, and then I'll go ahead and import that function, which is get user model. So I'll simply come right here and then assign our user to self. So just say self.user, and this case is going to be equal to get user model, and then after I'll just come right here and say we're going to get our objects, and then we shall basically create a user based on these credentials or these attributes. So we're going to have a username, and our username is going to be our test user. So I'll just simply call this the test user, and then we shall provide our email. So I'll come right in here and say our email is going to be testuser@company, then this will be .com, and then we shall also have our password. So in this case I'm just going to come right here and then let's say test123, and right after having this, then we can go ahead and test if our user is actually having these attributes. So I'm going to do that is by querying for our user. So I can just come and say that our user is going to be equal to our get user model, and then we can call our object. So I'm just simply going to come right here and say .objects, then we shall get that user with the ID of 1, since it will be the only user in our database. Now I can go ahead and assert. So I can begin by asserting if this user is a super user, which is false because we haven't assigned that. So I can just come and say self.assert equal, and in this case we can say user.is, in this case staff, and in this case let's say assert it's false because this user is actually not a super user who is not a staff user. So if I come right here and run our test again, right now we see that all of our tests running, and this means that our user is not a super user or is not a staff user of our application. Now we can do the same thing. So I can go ahead and assert, and let's say assert equal, in this case we can say user, or let's say in this case we're actually going to say if our self.user.username is going to be equal to the user's username. So in this case we shall say user.username. So once we have this, I can just come right in here and run our test, and right now we have an error. So we have user test case has no attribute. So I made a mistake here. It's actually going to be assert. So when you run this, we now see that all our tests are running, meaning our user is not staff, and then our username is the same username of that exact user appearing within our database. In this video, we've been able to look at the basics of testing in Django. We've been able to look at how we create test cases as well as how we write our test functions. And we've learned how to basically go ahead and test some of the functionality that we have within our app for now. And if you found this video useful, please leave a like and don't forget to subscribe if you're new. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye.